You're watching special coverage of the day one of G20 Leaders Summit at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi on DD India with me, Munmin Bhattacharya, and my colleague, Gautam Roy.
Yes, and we're taking you through the entire day's proceedings, including the top developments that have taken place till now and what is in store for the day as well. But first up, the big stories.
The African Union has become a permanent member of the G20 at the invitation of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
US President Joe Biden reaffirms his support for India to become a permanent member of a reformed UN Security Council.
And a powerful earthquake in Morocco leaves over 630 people dead and hundreds injured. Addressing the G20 summit, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed leaders from various countries to day one of the event. Prime Minister stated that the mantra of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas and Sabka Prayas can be a guide to the world.
G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है और इसलिए सबका साथ, सबका विकास, सबका विश्वास, सबका प्रयास का मंत्र हम सभी के लिए एक पथ प्रदर्शक बन सकता है।
And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi also invited the African Union to the G20 permanent membership, comprising the world's richest and most powerful countries during the bloc summit in New Delhi.
सबका साथ की भावना से ही भारत ने प्रस्ताव रखा था कि अफ्रीकन यूनियन को G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता दी जाए। मेरा विश्वास है कि इस प्रस्ताव पर हम सबकी सहमति है। आप सबकी सहमति से आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं।
Now we are being joined by Dr. Bhaskar Balakrishnan, former Indian ambassador, and Professor Swaran Singh with the School of International Studies in JNU for perspective. Ambassador Balakrishnan, I'll come to you first. Are you surprised with the speed with which the inclusion of the African Union as the 21st member of the G20 has happened?
I'm not surprised because I know that the Prime Minister has himself canvassed and personally made great efforts to push this through. Starting from January, he has written to all the leaders asking them for their approval for this proposal. And I think behind the scenes also a lot of effort has gone into it. There were probably one or two voices from the Europeans who had hesitation, because there are a couple of European countries who feel they are entitled to be part of the G20. I will not name the countries, but there were. So including the African Union was not a trivial task. It involved some diplomatic effort. And I think the Prime Minister personally engaged himself. And as you saw, he very carefully started the proceeding by saying that if you all have approve of this, then I propose the African Union be admitted as a permanent member of the G20. And hearing no objection, he banged the gavel, and formally African Union became a permanent member of G20. He invited them to take the seat. So this was very well and masterfully done. And I think it's a good start to the whole G20. I think Prime Minister deserves full credit for the diplomatic effort here.
He does, and I'm sure Africa will appreciate it as well. Professor Swaran Singh, in terms of what has happened today, what does it really mean to Africa, the inclusion of the African Union, which is a body of 55 countries coming together back in 1999, and they'd been seeking that membership of the G20 for the last 7 years. Now it's going to be G21. What does it mean for them, and what is it? How does it place India in the conscience of Africa now?
I think, first of all, it means for Africa a very strong endorsement of global community that Africa is an integral part of global governance and therefore should be part of global institutions.
Well, these are live visuals of the arrival of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, who has now landed in New Delhi for his participation in day one of the G20 Leaders Summit at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. He's being received at the airport of New Delhi.
Yes, that's the Minister waiting, receiving him, and he will very soon proceed straight, I believe, to Bharat Mandapam, because proceedings have been underway over there. Emmanuel Macron, a major constituent of the G20, France being a major constituent there, and would have a formidable role to play, where getting everyone to one common point on a range of issues is concerned. France has a lot to say as far as Ukraine is concerned, but it has been trying to play a bit of a balancing role related to Russia and Ukraine, even in the European Union, and we'll have to wait and see if that will persist here in the G20 as well, Munmun.
Yes, so Emmanuel Macron has now arrived in New Delhi, and he was the only leader that we were missing in the official launch of the G20 Leaders Summit this morning, and he is flanked by an Indian minister besides the Ambassador of France to India. A cultural function being organized at the airport itself to honor the visiting dignitaries, and now France will also be participating in day one of the G20 Leaders Summit. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was a few months back in France. He was the guest of honor in the Bastille Day celebrations on the 14th of July. And there is a vision document aiming at 2047, and the year India will complete 100 years of its independence, that has since been issued. India and France are strategic partners and among the closest as far as Indian partners in Europe is concerned. And the French President Emmanuel Macron are now driving off from the Delhi airport straight, we believe, to the venue of the G20 Leaders Summit, that is Bharat Mandapam.
Yes, these leaders are no strangers to hitting the ground running. We've seen just yesterday Joe Biden do that, and today it'll be Emmanuel Macron, it seems.
Yes. So let's go back to the guests who are with us, Ambassador Balakrishnan and Professor Swaran Singh. Professor Singh, now we have Mr. Macron here. And in terms of the development partnership, in terms of strategic partnership, it's a very strong partnership that India and France share. But in the G20 context, where do you see this partnership?
I think, first of all, there is a whole region of Africa called the Francophone Africa. So how Africa is co-opted into G20, France definitely will have a role to play in that. India and France have also been working together in Western Indian Ocean, particularly on anti-piracy issues on east coast of Africa. So there is a constant change in India-France relationship. You mentioned of Bastille Day. The overall nuclear cooperation or defense cooperation has taken a very different shape. So in that sense, Macron's arrival will boost India's enthusiasm in pushing certain issues that India is pushing forward towards seeing that a final New Delhi declaration is achieved at end of this 1.5 day of summit. The first session, as we understand, has gone on beyond its time. So that would be fine for Macron to now join in lunchtime, and then of course be there for the second and third sessions. So definitely there must be some serious reasons why as to his arrival was delayed by half a day at least. And therefore now his joining is a reflection of his commitment to still be part of the G21, as I should say now, summit meeting in New Delhi. And since France is a very strong and sort of warm partner of India, it will only strengthen India's efforts to steer the negotiations, the deliberations in a sort of direction where India wants to take it. And very clearly, France has also been in Europe a country that often speaks for countries of third world and the least developed countries. It has been a voice for them among European countries. And that is what is the main focus of India's presidency has been so far in last 9 months, to bring global South center stage. So I think Macron's arrival now is only going to further strengthen India's hands in steering the deliberations and taking them to a certain fruition where India wants to take these deliberations of G20 of 2023, G21 now of 2023.
Certainly, we can presume that very constructive role France has played in terms of furthering the kind of values that India holds as well. And I request both of you, Dr. Balakrishnan and Professor Swaran Singh, to stay with us. In the meantime, I'm taking you across to Amritpal Singh, my colleague there at Bharat Mandapam at the G20 Summit's venue in the national capital. Good afternoon to you, Amrit. We just saw Emmanuel Macron landing at the airport. I presume that he'll be there very soon at Bharat Mandapam as well. And what we were wondering is how would his physical presence, now that he's arrived after the first session is over, I think during the working lunch, how would it strengthen India's efforts to ensure that everyone is on one page when it comes to that communique tomorrow?
France, as Professor Swaran Singh was saying, is an important country and holds considerable weight in geopolitics, given its colonial past and the influence it exerts over many nations in Africa. Also, it has got territories in the Indo-Pacific, so it's got interests. There are a lot of interests that coincide with India. And when it comes to G20, be it on the climate change issue, be it on issues of technological transformation, be it on lifestyle for environment, France and Indian priorities match a lot, and it has the French backing. The over 230 odd meetings under different work streams. We saw, the French work very closely with the Indian presidency. So there may be differences on, how they view the Russia-Ukraine war and how India views it, and or what India feels is the way forward, or how the French see it. But apart from that, there is a convergence on many issues, especially the G20 priorities of India under its presidency of strengthening the voice of the global South, of women-led development, of technological transformation, of digital public infrastructure. In fact, when Prime Minister was in Paris, he had offered UPI, which has become effective at the Eiffel Tower. So payment through the Indian UPI system at the Eiffel Tower. So India and France have a lot of congruence when it comes to issues bilaterally, and also France has extended a lot of support to the Indian priorities of at G20.
Certainly. And Amrit, since we had been told that there will be time in the midst of what's happening on day one for certain bilaterals and policides as well, just wanted to find out from you, where are we on those, well, at least 4 bilaterals that we were told are slated for today?
That's right. There are 4 bilaterals that are slated. One with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, the other with the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, one with the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and one with the Italian Prime Minister. So these Rishi Sunak's bilateral was supposed to happen even as we speak, but that's got a little delayed because the first session carried on longer than the time allotted for it. So, but this will follow subsequently in some time from now through the day till the evening. These bilaterals, 4 bilaterals, will take place. Gautam?
All right, Amrit. Thanks a lot for that update for the moment. We will turn to you once again as and when we get an update on what is going on through the day. I believe the lunch is on right now, and the second session of the day, which is One Family, is slated for 3 p.m.
That's right, Gautam.
Cool. Thank you.
Presently, the lunch is on and the second session.
Thank you for that quick update, Amritpal Singh from Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the G20 summit in India.
Yes, focusing further on the bilaterals, the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is expected to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi soon, and Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan continues to be with us. Ambassador Balakrishnan, what does the fact that Rishi Sunak is the first British Prime Minister of Indian origin does that have any impact on the future of the India-UK bilateral relationship?
I would say that yes, it would have some impact, certainly on the personal chemistry between the two leaders. And of course, on the fact that Rishi Sunak would have more familiarity with India and various aspects of India. So to that extent, it is an advantage. But I think we don't have to push it too far, because we must remember that as Prime Minister of the UK, he sort of represents the interests of the UK as a whole. And already before he came here, there were reports in the UK media about a possible concession on visas, which was, there was criticism that this should not be given away. And I think Rishi Sunak was forced to admit that, this would not be done. And then there was another clarification from the Indian side that what was meant was basically visas for intra-corporate transfers. That is, Indian companies who are working in the UK should have the freedom to bring in their staff or people on, just like they have the same facility in the UK. So this is sort of going on. The trade agreement is going to be a tough one because what is happening is, if it was only on trade, then matters would be much simpler. But now what has happened, especially the advanced countries, they are tagging on a lot of other issues onto the trade. For example, in the trade agreement, for example, UK is trying to get, the patent regime in India to accept certain concessions for drug companies. So when you add things like IPR, and you add things like maybe human rights or maybe labor standards, environmental standards onto the back of a trade agreement, you are literally going to break the back. So I think the trade agreement, both with the UK and EU, suffers from this disease, that the other side wants to tag on a lot of issues, which are non-trade issues, and extract concessions from that. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Otherwise, relations with the UK, there's another issue of taking action against elements in the UK who misuse their freedom of expression to attack India and Indian institutions. And even the premises of the High Commission were vandalized. So this is an irritant in the relations. I think Western democracies need to realize that freedom of expression and freedom of speech has to have certain responsible limits.
Ambassador, we'll leave it at that. You have listed out a number of issues that are likely to figure, you're saying, in the talks between the UK Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister, namely the FTA negotiations and, of course, the concerns that India has with regard to the operation of certain pro-Khalistan elements there.
Certainly, and we will get to them as and when we learn of that bilateral happening. For the moment, We're moving on, and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has expressed his gratitude for including the African Union as a G20 member country. On the social media site X, Ramaphosa called for enhanced and expanded global partnership for sustainable development. The post came after the inaugural session of the ongoing G20 summit, where India's Prime Minister announced the African Union as part of the G20 members.
Expressing his delight at the inclusion of African Union as the 21st member of the G20. And saying that global reconstruction in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic presents a unique opportunity to accelerate the transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient and sustainable societies. And so, listing out priorities for the whole of the African bloc. Now, Nigeria is looking to the G20 to bolster investment in developing countries. To that end, it is expected that he will offer assurances to prospective investors that the country is business-friendly. We're talking about the country's President Bola Tinubu, who said as much to business leaders in India who are pledging about $14 billion in investment to the West African country. Correspondent Tessima Kende reports.
President Bola Tinubu is in India for the G20, his first official visit to the country since he became president in May. Besides meeting with other global heads of state, this trip is an opportunity to drum up international investment. Tinubu spokesperson Ajuri Ngelale says investments are already flowing in, including an $8 billion pledge from Indorama Petrochemical to expand its fertilizer production and petrochemical facility in Rivers State in Nigeria's South-South region. One of India's largest private steel producers, Jindal Steel and Power Limited, has also committed $3 billion in Nigeria, while Skipper Cell Group has announced a $1.6 billion investment in the country's power sector. President Bola Tinubu has assured them of policies that will guarantee best returns on investments, like reduced taxation and improved security of lives and property, which has been a concern. He is happy that the agreements will manifest in industries and jobs in his country, where over 80 million of the citizens are unemployed. The investments are to come in phases, and President Tinubu says he would ensure Nigeria, under his leadership, becomes the vessel of development, prosperity and democracy in Africa. Tassim Akende in Jos, reporting for DD India.
And the inclusion of the African Union must be a shot in the arm for Bola Tinubu as well. Now, on the sidelines of the G20 meeting, Prime Minister Modi continues to hold bilateral meetings with world leaders. The delegation are expected to further deepen the bonds of friendship and cooperation.
And on Friday, PM Modi held a bilateral meeting with US President Joe Biden at his official residence in New Delhi. During the meeting, both leaders discussed a wide range of topics to further economic and people-to-people linkages between both the countries.
Prime Minister Modi expressed confidence that the friendship between both nations will continue to play a great role in furthering global good. The US President reiterated support for India's permanent membership in a reformed UN Security Council.
And here are some of the key takeaways from the Modi-Biden bilateral. Joe Biden has welcomed a request from India's Defense Ministry to procure 31 drones from the United States. In a joint statement, the two leaders reaffirmed the importance of Quad in supporting, and I quote, a free, open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific. The two men called on their governments to continue transforming the Indo-US strategic partnership across all dimensions. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Joe Biden reaffirmed their commitment to the G20 and expressed confidence that the outcomes of the summit will advance shared goals.
And President Biden also praised India's G20 presidency for further demonstrating how the G20 as a forum is delivering important outcomes. Prime Minister Modi and President Biden reiterated their support for building resilient global semiconductor supply chains, and the Indian and US leaders have agreed to deepen and diversify the India-US major defense partnership.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet his British counterpart Rishi Sunak on Saturday. They are expected to discuss trade and other bilateral issues. The Indian origin leader touched down at New Delhi's airport on Friday. India has emerged as a leading economic partner of the UK, especially after Brexit, and there is a possibility of a free trade agreement if negotiations are to conclude in due course.
And this, of course, is Rishi Sunak's first visit to India after taking over as Prime Minister of the country last year. During his brief visit, Rishi Sunak may meet members of his extended family who also live in Delhi.
On the roadmap for India-UK relations, the two leaders aim to determine the future of a free trade agreement. Both countries will also discuss the visa issue. The two superpowers of the world focus to create a fruitful outcome from the summit as well as the bilateral meeting.
The ties between India and the UK are defined by their shared history as well as cultural, economic and political cooperation. The UK is home to over 1.5 million British Indians, and the Indian diaspora is the country's largest ethnic minority community. In 2022, the role of this group gained renewed prominence globally after Rishi Sunak became the UK's first Prime Minister of Indian origin. The year also saw Indian students surpassing Chinese nationals as the largest group of foreign students in the UK. India is also the country's second largest source of foreign direct investment after the US. So it's not surprising that New Delhi and London have been working on a free trade agreement. The most recent trade negotiations between the two were held this month. An FTA means reduced tariffs on goods and services, and that will in turn facilitate an increase in exports. If signed, the deal will be a landmark for both the countries. Comprising 26 chapters, this will be one of the most comprehensive trade pacts between India and a Western nation. It will also pave the way for similar deals with countries like Canada. For the UK, the FTA will ensure easier access to a non-European market in a post-Brexit world. Having agreed on 19 of the total 26 FTA chapters, India and UK are closing in on finalizing the pact, whose negotiations began in 2021. Meanwhile, both the nations continue to make breakthroughs in investment. Earlier this year, India's Tata Group announced that it would invest over $5 billion to build an EV battery plant in the UK, making it one of the largest ever fundings in the country's automotive sector.
And this just happened a few minutes ago, the arrival of the French president, that's Emmanuel Macron there, who landed a few minutes earlier at the international airport in Delhi to attend the G20 summit. Being greeted by the minister in waiting there. Like I said, we're playing out these images just from a few minutes back. He's probably the last one to arrive, really, in terms of all the leaders who are arriving for the G20 summit in Delhi.
Emmanuel Macron is president of France. He was born in 1977 in Amiens. Macron graduated from École Nationale's administrations. He worked as a civil servant in finance before running for office. In 2012, he joined President Francois Hollande's team as Deputy Secretary General, then became Minister of Economy, Industry and Digital Affairs. Macron launched the party En Marche, and then in 2017 became the youngest ever French president at the age of 39. He was re-elected last year.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to meet his Japanese counterpart Fumio Kishida on the sidelines of the summit. Both the leaders have met on several occasions since Kishida became the Prime Minister in 2021.
The friendship between India and Japan is rooted in historical and cultural ties. Over the years, the two nations have witnessed an increase in economic and defense cooperation. DD India's Ross Cullen reports.
India and Japan's ties are defined by their shared political, economic and strategic interests. Both countries are part of several international organisations, including the G20 and the Quad. Recent years have seen an upswing in high-level political engagements between India and Japan. In 2014, during Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Tokyo, the two nations agreed to a special strategic and global partnership. The friendship between Modi and former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was also a reflection of the bond shared by their countries. Abe made a trip to the western Indian city of Ahmedabad, where he and Modi laid the foundation of the high-speed rail project linking the city to India's financial capital Mumbai. Japan provided nearly 80% of the project's funding. Declining health forced Abe to step down in 2020. In 2022, he, along with two other former Prime Ministers of Japan, met with Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the Quad Summit in the Japanese capital. When Shinzo Abe was assassinated later that year, India declared a national day of mourning. His successors have carried on the legacy of strong cooperation with India. The current Japanese Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, visited India last year for the 14th India-Japan Annual Summit. The visit saw Japan pledge a $42 billion investment in India over the next 5 years. Defence has also become an integral part of the relationship between the two nations, with a growing focus on the Indo-Pacific region. This year, India and Japan held their first air exercise at the Hyakuri Air Base near Tokyo.
Japan will be looking to solidify its position as the world leader at the summit after successfully hosting the G7 earlier this year. Chris Gilbert reports from Tokyo on the expectations of Japan from the G20 summit.
Well, Japan is entering this G20 summit fresh off hosting the G7 summit earlier this year, where all member countries united in their condemnation of Russia for the war in Ukraine, and in one voice to condemn any country which attempts to change the status quo by a unilateral act of force with an eye on China. Japan is going to want to use this opportunity to expand that voice and get more countries on board with that message, as it is concerned that a Ukraine-type conflict could one day erupt in its own backyard. It also has domestic demographic problems. It is going to look to G20 member countries and invitees to make new agreements which will see more expats, more immigrants coming into Japan. Forecasts show that with a shrinking and declining population and workforce, that Japan is going to need over 15 years to more than double its current expat population to fill vital shortages in labor. However, there will be an elephant in every meeting and in every room, which is the global spectacle Japan just made last month by beginning the discharge of nuclear treated wastewater into the Pacific Ocean. China has been a vocal critic of that. It is likely to use the G20 summit to continue these complaints and criticisms. Japan is going to want to continue its campaign to try and glean understanding by explaining the safety of the discharge to member countries. It already has the US and South Korea on board. It is going to want to expand that list at this G20 summit. Chris Gilbert in Tokyo, reporting for DD India.
Our colleague Tapas Bhattacharya now joins us from the G20 summit venue, Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. Tapas, it's over to you.
You know, I have right now in the Craft Bazaar. This is the place where most of the stalls of the different parts of the country, the states, have actually set up. And it's a huge place, and most of the delegates who are coming here, they're absolutely thrilled to be part of this amazing journey. And to talk about that, talk about the expectations, the experiences, I have with me the G20 Secretary in India, Mr. Muktesh Pardesi. Sir, it's a huge event, and what we can tell you is that, you know, a lot of people are very happy, or most of the delegates we have spoken to, they seem to be very thrilled. What is, you know, your opinion? I mean, what is the expectation you are getting?
No, I'm so happy that people are liking it. That was the intention. The whole intention has been to project a country which is rich in its cultural diversity, in terms of crafts, in terms of its culinary tradition, and in terms of overall soft power. So G20 presidency is giving us an opportunity to showcase not only development in digital sector, and you have seen there are several exhibits also on digital space, but also to promote the handicrafts, one district, one products, and give...
All right, we're getting live images now. That's the French president, Emmanuel Macron. We saw him arrive a short while ago at the international airport, and now he's at the venue of the G20 summit at Bharat Mandapam. You can see him walking up. Perhaps he will be greeted by Prime Minister Modi, because that's what Prime Minister Modi did with the other leaders in the morning, and also those who lead different global organizations, global institutions.
Yes.
President Macron has been the last among the G20 leaders to arrive in India for the summit, and he's making his way to the working lunch, which is scheduled to go on till about 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
And a bilateral meeting is expected between the two leaders on the 10th of September. But right now, you were looking at the arrival of the French President Emmanuel Macron to the Bharat Mandapam G20 summit venue. Let's go back to my colleague Tapas Bhattacharya.
Right, Munmun. Right, Munmun, and but this is we were talking about how India has portrayed its soft power. Tell us also, the countries have come, a lot of delegates have come. What is this, sense you are getting? What kind of talks that are happening? Prime Minister spoke today about India being, providing that leadership. How do you see the whole G20 coming up now?
I think we're very happy the way the meeting has started this morning. Yesterday, we had all the leaders who arrived in Delhi. Today, the President of France is arriving. This morning, you saw how our Honorable Prime Minister, he received all leaders individually. There's a personal chemistry between him and most of the leaders that got reflected when he was receiving them. Thereafter, in his opening address, he announced the admission of the African Union as permanent.
That's a huge thing,
A huge thing. As you rightly say, it's a huge thing. So we started with a bang. And so that's, that's a part of our ambition to champion the cause of the global South, admit the African Union as part of the G20 membership, and then have a very outcome-oriented Delhi declaration by the time we close the meeting tomorrow.
So we will talk about Delhi Declaration, but India also played a pivotal role in the last Bali Declaration also. Do you think that this time also it will be able to bring both the North and the South together, and we will be able to have a proper declaration?
No, hopefully, yes, we are working on the Delhi Declaration, and but it will be done in the concluding session. And so, in the beginning, in the opening address, it's the admission of the African Union, and by the time we have the concluding session tomorrow, usually declaration is adopted in the last, because we have to allow consultation of leaders.
Consensus is also important.
See what happens, the Sherpas have been working hard on this, and we just had a meeting, 3 days meeting in Manesa. So they have worked on the draft, but the draft bill has to be put across to leaders, because it's a leaders summit. So once we have the endorsement of the leaders, it will be adopted in the tomorrow morning session.
So today it's a hectic day where a lot of bilaterals happening. President Biden also came. You just tell us. What are the major takeaways that we can take? Get from this particular G20 in Delhi.
Well, the priorities of India and our presidency is known. We have been focusing on resilient growth. We have been focusing on attainment of sustainable development goals. We're talking about green development, including climate financing. We are speaking about women-led development, and the role of digital transformation, and the role of digital public infrastructure in economic development. So keeping that in mind, we have set up several exhibits in Bharat Mandapam to showcase digital transformation which India has undergone. So when you visit the Department of the Ministry of IT Digital Experience Zone, you see how digital payment and financial inclusion have been made possible through digital means.
Have you guys got any query from any of the delegate countries or for the matter any other country that they would like to partner India in this kind of digital power growth and digital inclusion?
We have received, and Ministry of INT, Ministry of IT, I understand from them that there have been several requests for a memorandum of understanding with India to do collaborative programs in the digital sector.
So also, RBI have set up a lot of digital payment booth and all that. So is there any chance that we will be moving towards more financial inclusion or let's say fintech sector in the days to come?
That's a part of the strategy, government's strategy. That's why some of the upcoming things RBI is also promoting through this digital experience. The things which are in the pipeline, RBI has been kind enough to set up this digital kiosk and share with the world how we are looking ahead.
Like, last question I'd like to ask you, sir. India started the International Solar Alliance, right? Could we see something like a biofuel alliance in the days to come by the end of this particular G20? Can we expect something like that?
Most likely. The countries are working towards that objective. Hopefully several initiatives will be announced by the time we conclude our meeting tomorrow.
That's G20 Secretary. That's G20 Secretary. Thank you so much. That's G20 Secretary telling us that in all likelihood we might be having a global biofuel alliance just like the International Solar Alliance. Back to you, the studio.
Well, thanks, Tapas, for that. And there you heard and saw Muktesh Pardeshi smiling,
yes, I
indicating...
like how he was trying to hold his cards close to his chest like a Cheshire cat, looking very pleased with himself. And Tapas is trying to pry them out of his hands.
Yes, but there is every indication that a G20 summit declaration is now coming up. The fine print remains to be seen. We'll take a break at this point in time, but a lot more coming up next.
Welcome to Lakshadweep, the land of 100,000 islands, the aquatic wonderland of India, an archipelago of spectacular marine gems, colorful coral and crystal clear lagoons, a kaleidoscope of turquoise blue. Each island of Lakshadweep draws in explorers with its unique beauty. Witness idyllic sunsets and pristine beaches of Kavarati, the majestic lighthouse and colorful boat races at Minikoi. Experience water sports in the shallow lagoons of Kadmat. Unwind in the serene setting of Bangaram. Lakshadweep offers a precious heritage of ecology and culture, with rhythmic beats of folk dances echoing through these islands, delighting visitors in traditional folk dances and local artworks with abundant marine life and mineral resources. The islands are advancing towards a greener, brighter future. Lakshadweep is set to amaze visitors with its breathtaking wonders and picturesque seascapes. In the enduring spirit of incredible India.
Welcome back. You're watching our special coverage of the G20 summit. Day 1 is underway and we are getting you updates on the big developments that have been taking place. First up, the inclusion of the African Union as well. And we'll keep tracking what's happening there as well. At the same time, we're apprising you of the bilaterals that are slated for today as well. And the Italian Prime Minister, that is Giorgia Meloni, is also in New Delhi for the summit. And she is slated to have a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Modi as well. That is also a bilateral that is slated for the day. These are the images that came in yesterday in the morning when she had landed in the national capital for the G20 summit. Giorgia Meloni, that is Italy, her country has been a partner, a strategic partner for India as well. That is something that India and Italy have already struck up, and they're looking to expand that partnership as well. That would be one of the agenda items for the two leaders.
And during a visit to New Delhi earlier this year, the Italian Prime Minister called on her Indian counterpart, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, to push for quote-unquote just peace in Ukraine. Giles Gibson reports from Rome.
The Italian Prime Minister is set to give two speeches during the G20 summit, the first on the environment and climate change, and she's also going to be speaking during a session on the digital transition and artificial intelligence. However, what happens on the sidelines of these summits is arguably just as important. Giorgia Meloni is set to avoid a potentially tricky encounter with China's president, and that's because Xi Jinping has decided not to attend this summit in New Delhi. That encounter potentially tricky because Italy is reportedly planning to pull out of an agreement that it made with China back in 2019 to join the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Meanwhile, on the issue that's expected to drive a wedge between G20 members in New Delhi, that being the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the Meloni government has been very strong in terms of its support for the stance taken by the United States and its Western allies. During a trip to Washington in July, we saw Giorgia Meloni and the US President Joe Biden putting out a joint statement saying that they would support Ukraine for, quotes, as long as it takes. There's also another geopolitical issue that Giorgia Meloni has put a lot of time and political capital into, and that's migration. For example, she has called for there to be much more collaboration with countries in Northern Africa to try to address the root causes of migration. And actually heading into the G20 summit, she was one of the voices calling for the African Union, or the AU, to be given what's known as permanent membership status. Just finally, Italy is also preparing for its own moment in the diplomatic spotlight next year, and that's because it's going to be taking on the presidency of the G7 from Japan in 2024. Now, the Italian government has not given us many details about what its big priorities for that presidency are going to be, but they have told us that there's going to be a leaders' summit in the southern region of Puglia in June 2024. Giles Gibson.
And this is a photo opportunity of 5 leaders, the present chair of G20, the future chair of G20, and the chair of G20 for 2025 as well. So South Africa, Brazil, India, besides World Bank, which is an organization which is a partner country of the G20, and the United States of America's President Joe Biden as well. So 5 leaders holding hands. So this is a photo opportunity on the sidelines of day 1 of the G20 Leaders Summit. 5 leaders coming together after the first session of day 1 of the G20 Leaders Summit. We'll be heading now into the second session, which is titled One Family. But an extremely significant photo op that you are seeing right now. Prime Minister Narendra Modi right at the center, and flanked by Brazil as well as South Africa. Brazil is going to be the next chair of the G20, and the handing over of the gavel is likely to take place tomorrow, and then Brazil will further hand it over to South Africa. World Bank has come out with a lot of praise for India, especially for its financial inclusion program powered by its digital public infrastructure, and for saving billions of dollars of the exchequer's money in India through the direct benefit transfer. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had tweeted about that report of the World Bank as well. And not to forget, there's US President Joe Biden. And Jessica Taneja is my colleague joining from the G20 venue. Jessica, please take this over.
Well, we're at the Bharat Mandapam where all the activity is happening. We've seen since morning the leaders have been welcomed, and what a welcome for them here in the national capital. And also looking at the important developments that have happened over the day, we've seen the African Union, of course, become part of the G20, and the expectations that we'll have, especially from the United Kingdom Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, is something to watch for. Of course, there's this free trade agreement that we're looking at with Britain, stalled since last year. The one with the Canadian Prime Minister also yet to be discussed. No, not much detail there, but yes, the FTA there stalled as well. And we're expecting some swift movement in those FTAs. Apart from that, the interesting bilateral that will be held with the Saudi Crown Prince and the Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Salman, wherein the new court, including the United States, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and India, looking at a dedicated infrastructure build-up of railways and port links to connect Middle East to India, and also European Union, and European countries also play a crucial role in that, and they also benefits, of course. A lot of projects planned, a lot of deliberations held. But the hard task would be to get everybody on the table and finally get that joint communique, which should be in tomorrow. But so far, it's been a good day for Indian diplomacy.
Certainly, what playing out, Jessica, right now for our viewers is this set of images that we've got of world leaders, including the chairs which will be taking over the G20 presidency. And, of course, there's the US President and Ajay Banga of the World Bank in the mix as well. What can you tell us about that? It is a very warm handshake that we're playing out the images of. Just contextualize it for us.
Well, the grandeur at display, of course, there are no words for that. But at the moment, we see how India has been hailed by the World Bank as well. We're set to become a 10 trillion economy by 2030, and we're expecting a lot more economic drive from India, and a lot of expectations from our partner countries, and of course focus on digital infrastructure for the developing nations, something that India has put up on its agenda. Apart from being the voice of the global south, we're expecting some interesting engagements towards the evening as well. And of course, as I was pointing out, what all comes out of the different the bilaterals that still remain is something we'll have to watch for.
Right, Jessica, thanks a lot for that update from Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the G20 summit. Now a little snippet from the sidelines as well of the G20 summit. Kesang Thangrat, the son of Indonesian president, along with his family, visited the iconic Taj Mahal located in Agra, a northern city in India in the state of Uttar Pradesh. He was seen posing for a picture along with his wife and the wonder of the world in the backdrop. Indonesian President Joko Widodo landed in the national capital Delhi on Friday for the G20 summit.
Indonesia was the previous chair of the G20, and Indonesia had wanted that India take forward the presidency with continuity, and says that it's happy that India did deliver on that expectation. Divyendu Mondal will be joining us in just a bit from Bharat Mandapam, the G20 summit venue. But talking about those shots that we just saw, it is really an attraction for people and for leaders coming from all around the world. And we've seen that in the past decade as well.
Oh yes, India is known for that. It's on the world map for that. But there's so much else in India to see as well. And that is something that was brought out very well, I'm sure, through the kind of structuring of the G20 presidency that we had in India through 60 cities and over 600 meetings.
Of course, it has been a pan-India celebration. President of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, had also arrived in New Delhi for the upcoming G20 summit. The UAE is a guest country of the G20.
Now, ties between India and Saudi Arabia have existed for thousands of years due to trade. In recent times, the two nations have become economic and cultural partners. Our next report tells you more about this bilateral cooperation.
Diplomatic relations between India and Saudi Arabia were established soon after the former gained independence in 1947. Presently, Saudi Arabia is India's fourth largest trading partner. The Gulf Kingdom is also among the top suppliers of crude oil to India. The ties between the two nations are not limited to economy. Nearly 2.2 million Indians live in Saudi Arabia, making them the largest expatriate community in the country. In a major boost to bilateral cultural ties, Saudi Arabia increased India's Hajj quota by 30,000 in 2019. The number now stands at 200,000 per year. India currently sends the second highest number of pilgrims for Hajj after Indonesia. High-level engagements between New Delhi and Riyadh have increased in recent times. In 2016, during his visit to Saudi Arabia, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was conferred with the kingdom's highest civilian honor, the Order of King Abdulaziz. 3 years later, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman visited India. During the coronavirus pandemic, India provided 4.5 million Covishield vaccines to the kingdom in 2021. While Saudi Arabia sent liquid oxygen to India during the second wave of COVID. This year, the kingdom helped India evacuate its citizens from conflict-hit Sudan. As part of India's Operation Kaveri, the evacuations were carried out via Saudi Arabian port of Jeddah, where a transit facility was set up. In August, Saudi Arabia became one of the 6 countries that have been invited to join Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, or the BRICS group, in 2024.
And Singapore has said that it will actively contribute to G20 discussions in its capacity as the convener of the 3G, which is an informal group of about 30 nations that aren't G20 members but have an important stake in the gathering. Patrick Falk has more.
Well, as a small nation, Singapore doesn't have a seat at the G20 table, but it is an important financial centre and also punches above its weight in the geopolitical arena. And what happens at the gathering in India in the coming days will have crucial implications for the city-state and its economy because of its status as a major international commercial hub. Now, this is coming at a critical juncture for Singapore. It's in the midst of succession plans, which could come as early as next year. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong is expected to hand over power to Deputy PM and Finance Minister Lawrence Wong. But those plans have been threatened by a series of scandals recently involving the ruling PAP party. Singapore has capitalized on the flurry of diplomatic activity taking place within the region and hosted Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau ahead of his touchdown in New Delhi to strengthen bilateral and trade ties between the two countries.
Well, lifting our vulnerable communities is a priority of India's G20 presidency, and that includes migrant workers. In Singapore, they make up a fifth of the island state's 1.2 million strong workforce, but they face huge challenges integrating. That's inspired one entrepreneur to set up a social enterprise project to empower them through technology and education. Patrick Falk has more.
Housed in this building known as the Hive at Nanyang Technological University is the Social Development Initiative, or SDI, Academy. Every weekend, dozens, sometimes even hundreds of migrant workers fill the classrooms, taking part in courses to improve their English language and financial literacy skills.
We want to fill up the entire building one day. So that's the dream.
SDI is the brainchild of Sazad Hussain. Originally from Bangladesh, he came to Singapore when he was 11. His own struggles to integrate then inspired him to set up the academy. On this day, he's interviewing a candidate for a new marketing position. Since launching in 2014, SDI has expanded considerably, training more than 18,000 migrant workers and helping them to improve their lives.
So I was always very passionate about contributing and impacting the migrant workers. I struggled with the language, coming to Singapore, integrating with the rest of the society, getting into school, and that sort of gave me a bit of course it's not the same, but it gave me a lot of insights of how somebody who is foreign to this country and might not even know the language can have, problems accessing opportunities or even keeping themselves safe.
The courses are designed to help workers navigate basics like workplace safety and how to handle personal finances. But there are broader impacts. Many workers who come to Singapore hope to return home eventually and start small businesses. SDI equips them with entrepreneurial training. For others, it can help pave the way for a career elsewhere. Blue-collar migrant workers are rarely afforded the ability to settle in Singapore.
It's true that they don't, but I think that it is a system that makes sense for Singapore. Singapore is very careful about who they choose as permanent residents and as citizens. And although there are a few workers from, let me just say Bangladesh, who might like that, they are relatively few in number.
One of STI's new initiatives, Crane HR, incorporates technology to create worker opportunities. One of the things it does is it uses generative artificial intelligence, and based on the prompts embedded into it, automates resume building. It also provides video portfolios of specialist skills workers have to offer. One key problem for many employers in the construction industry is skills mismatch. It can bear a significant impact on productivity, something the videos help mitigate.
So that an employer anywhere in the world, regardless of the race or background, they're able to see, oh, this guy is actually able to do tungsten welding, and I need a tungsten welder. So it removes a lot of bias based on how they're hiring, who they're hiring, and it brings a lot more transparency in the process as well.
Over the years, STI has helped improve the lives of thousands of migrant workers. But Sazad says his biggest mark of success is helping those who've been able to find work beyond Singapore and resettle overseas through residency programs with their families for a chance to escape poverty back home. Patrick Falk in Singapore, reporting for DD India.
And an important update there, you can see the bilateral meeting taking place between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, the first British Prime Minister of Indian origin. He is on his first visit to India as the British Prime Minister. The two leaders can be seen engrossed in a conversation, a warm hug, and before that a handshake shows the chemistry between the two leaders. And it is expected that the both leaders will be talking about a free trade agreement, because talks have been on for around 18 months now, and they haven't come to fruition as yet. Besides that, there are a number of other issues that both countries are likely to talk about. For instance, climate action, with India and the UK together having launched One Sun, One Grid program. Besides IRIS, the infrastructure for resilient island states. So besides that, strategic issues could also come up in the talks between the two leaders, because there were concerns with regard to activities of certain pro-Khalistan elements that had attacked the Indian High Commission in London some time back. And the
yes,
UK...
Certainly, the UK would like to partner with India in a lot of domains, not just technology and health, but strategic ones as well, including defence. But all that will work much better if the trade agreement is worked out, and let's hope that the two leaders can push it along. And that's all we have for the moment in this edition of our special coverage of the G20 summit, which will remain ongoing on DD India. So stay with us.
Namaskar for now.